just want to carry what he's talking about. I want to encourage you to try to speak to the group, or even if it's not this group, find another meetup or user group to speak at. For me, one thing it does is it helps me try to focus on a particular technology and try to learn it and get better at it. Because when you have to present it to somebody else, it's amazing how much more depth you get out of it. So every time I write a book or a blog article or something like that, it's kind of a selfish act in a way to force me to learn something better. So if nothing else, if you're not fear, have a fear of speaking or whatever, it's a great way to kind of learn something a little better, a little deeper. And every time you add to your knowledge pool, you just make yourself more valuable. Okay, and I can't encourage you enough. I started doing presentations to groups probably 15 years ago in Raleigh, and it's just been a great experience as it's progressed. So I'm really glad to be here tonight. I know a few of you were over at the ASP user group last night, and I'm so glad when I get to come back to the Metroplex and speak, because this is where I grew up. I was raised in Cleveland, and somebody asked me earlier today. I moved away like 1984, I think, summer of 1984. I went for 6th grade and moved to St. Louis for a little while, and lived in North Carolina for I think 25 to 26 years, something like that. Did a little stint in Florida. Now I'm stuck outside of Philadelphia, and hopefully in another 5 or 6 years I'll be able to move out and have to decide between Raleigh or here. So one way or another I'll live here, but my parents still live here, so I come to town a few times a year. It's always great to get to speak in an area I consider my home. So anyway, thanks for coming out, guys. I know a lot of y'all first time at this user group, so hopefully you'll come back for future meetups and stuff here. So tonight we're going to talk about basically doing CSS. So who considers himself a web developer? If you're in an HTML5 user group, it better be everybody, right? That's good. All right. So that means you're all going to be totally engaged in all this. Like I said, my name is Chris Love. I blog at lovetodev.com, and I've been blogging, I don't know, 8 or 9 years now, maybe, I can't remember. It's been so long. I'm really active on Twitter. My wife thinks I'm overactive, but I've been on Twitter since day 7 of Twitter. But it's Chris Love. I snagged it early on before the realtor in San Diego got it. And I apologize. I didn't get a chance to take this out and put it in my normal slide deck. When I get that opportunity, I'll upload it to my SlideShare. But I'm doing this presentation in a few weeks out in Vegas at a conference, and they required me to put it in the slide deck template. And I've been kind of rushed for time because I'm selling and buying the houses right now, along with other stuff. So I just haven't had bandwidth to non-dev connection it. So, but a little background on who I am. I'm an ASP.NET MVP, which means I'm in kind of an award program with Microsoft with the ASP.NET team. So if I ever do any ASP.NET development, I talk to those guys a lot. I'm also one of their insiders. Essentially, that just means I get to talk to them quite a bit. But I'm also, we changed the name for now. We're trying to figure out what to really rename ourselves. An Edge user agent. I actually deal with the former Internet Explorer team, now the Edge team, a whole lot more than I do the ASP.NET team, to be quite honest with you. In fact, I chat with them all day long. We have an open dialogue on Skype. It's been very fascinating over the last, I guess, about 3 years now, having this dialogue with them, because I've become a lot more familiar and appreciative of what goes on in the browsers, and not just in Internet Explorer and Edge, but also how Chrome works and Firefox and Opera. And they've built bridges for me, some of those other teams, because they do communicate quite a bit. I don't think people realize just how much they do communicate with them. So anyway, that's been a great experience. It's helped me understand, like I said, the browsers, how they work better, which has made me understand how to write code a lot better. And hopefully some of that will kind of melt in to the talk that we do tonight, explain why some of the stuff you want to do certain ways and things like that. I've written a few books. On the next slide, I'll show you like the latest book that I published. I've got some more that I'm kind of stewing on whether I'm going to write or not. And, we'll see what happens to that. But by and large, I've been doing web development since 1992. And I'm not joking with that. When I was a student in NC State, we had big, powerful workstations. We were on the fiber internet, and we started publishing stuff on our little stuff. So I started doing HTML back when it was just Mosaic and just past links, and we didn't have image tags and stuff like that back then. So I've been involved and immersed in this web stuff for quite a long time now. This is, like I said, this is the last book that I published. It's about 1.5 years old at this point. When I build stuff now, I do single-page applications. I do go around speaking quite a bit about single-page applications. If you happen to be in New York City next Thursday, I will be doing a talk on high-performance single-page applications at the Web Perf meetup at the Spotify headquarters. I know a lot of you are going to be in New York next week, right? So my second favorite thing to do in Philadelphia is go to New York. My first favorite is to leave from here. So anyway, but it's a book about writing single-page applications, and I started writing single-page applications about 5 years ago, when there was no guidance out there, and I had reasons why I went about doing it that way, because it made more sense to build a web application mobile first as a single-page application. And so there's a lot of challenges that I learned how to overcome that I don't think a lot of mainstream developers have really grokked just yet. And hopefully some of that will come out if you get a chance to go through the book and read it. Like I said, I keep all my slide decks up on SlideShare. Hopefully by the end of the week I will have this slide deck up there kind of sanitized as far as the template goes, and you can download it. I am going to probably spend more time in the slide deck tonight than I normally would want to, because this is the first time I'm kind of going through this presentation, and it kind of helps me sort of stay on track. I do want to open the floor to any questions. A lot of great questions in last night's talk. I love talks where I get a lot of questions from people. So if there's something that's kind of bugging you and you kind of want to see if I can help you figure out how to deal with it or whatnot, feel free to ask. Just raise your hand. And if you're confused by something, again, just ask me or stop me, and it'll help me guide you into stuff. I've got a GitHub that's got a bunch of source code repositories up there. Some of the source code we're going to go over tonight's already up there. I've got another project I'm kind of compiling together that I'll probably have up there the next day or so too. It'll probably just be called CSS or something like that. And it'll have some of the demos that I'm going through tonight in it. So I'm still kind of refining some of the things, and I may add some more stuff to it over the next few weeks too, just to have a better base to kind of demo some things off of. All right. Well, before we get into this, are there any questions that some of you have about doing CSS? There's always good questions about it, right? Not tonight, though. Okay. All right.
Not yet.
Not yet. So, just real quick, CSS it's really just a language for defining rendering rules. So when we build applications on the web, there's three components to how this stuff is built. We always have HTML, which is the semantics or the structure to the content. And we have JavaScript, which is like an engine that can drive things for us. But we have CSS, which defines how the browser can render things. So when I started doing the web stuff back in 1992, we didn't have CSS. That was like another 2 years or 3 years down the road before CSS came out. So back then, all we had was a gray background, because that was default in Mosaic. And we had just blue links, and that's really all you could do. And we had some other like HTML tags, maybe make things with color or something like that. And most of those tags have been long since deprecated. So we didn't really have a good way to really define stuff. And the way we thought about it at that point is what we were doing was publishing research articles was the primary thing we were doing. And that's most of what I saw on the internet was like research articles. In fact, my graduate professor got a little on to me about publishing articles that were getting published in journals on my space on the university site. He's like, that's violating copyright rule, and that's when I learned what copyright rules were. So this is CSS. It tells the browser, this is how you should render this particular content. And it's very flexible, and it allows the browser to kind of bring the experience of life to a little bit more. And you can do a lot of things with CSS that a lot of people try to do with JavaScript. That's really the wrong way to do some things. Hopefully I'll kind of cover on some of that. I don't have a slide in here for it, but I'm just going to cover this real quick. Who's ever heard of the critical rendering path? This is not uncommon. Most people outside of the web performance community probably haven't heard of the critical rendering path. And I think this is a vital concept for web developers to get into. This is one of these things when you understand how the browser works, you understand how to structure code a little better. So the critical rendering path, basically what happens is the browser goes through the markup and looks for things on how to render stuff. So that, and what it does is it starts creating the DOM. But at the same time, it looks for CSS references, and it creates something, what it calls the CSS OM. And essentially what that does is it kind of melds together the markup and the rendering rules. And then at the same time, it goes through and parses the JavaScript. and if it hits a JavaScript, as soon as it hits JavaScript and it like determines that the integrity of the DOM has changed because of the JavaScript, it goes right back through the start of that cycle and goes back through the whole thing all over again. So having clean CSS and having smart CSS is important, and having good JavaScript habits and things like that. All these come into play to make that rendering process better. So when you've got good CSS, you've got an experience where the page can render and load a whole lot faster. And this is one of the things we talk about JavaScript and blocking called CSS is also a blocking operation as well. All right, so if you've done any web development, this is probably something pretty standard that you look at before. But this is what we call a CSS rule. So anytime in a CSS file, you see a collection of these, right? But I don't think a lot of developers necessarily know what they're called per se. But this is a selector, but it's actually a CSS rule, and this whole block is a rule, right? And the selector tells the browser how to find the element to apply these properties. So this rule is composed of a group of properties, and a property is a name-value pair. And so every element has properties that it supports, right? And then there's different types of elements too. So for example, we have a span tag, which is an inline element, which means it can render side by side. And then you have a div tag, which is a block element, which isn't necessarily designed to render side by side. But we can change it. I think this one doesn't have a display property on it, but you can change that property on there for the display to inline block. And so the element that you're targeting at that point would have both the same characteristics of the inline element, like a span, and the block element, like a div. So you can have something that's structured better, but also lays out next to each other. So you're kind of overriding the default actions here. The other thing that's starting to kind of fade away on us is vendor-specific prefixes. And you'll see some of these things because browsers, when standards or specs are early drafts, they don't necessarily know exactly what the final recommendation is going to be. So they do their best to kind of implement support for something. But what they try to do early on was put these vendor-specific prefixes in there just in case the spec transitioned off there. You could still kind of support it, sort of. All the browser vendors are trying to get away from this, like I said, because it's kind of confusing. Instead, what they're trying to go to now is these features, these early baked features behind flags. So you have to go to like about flags in the address bar, and it brings up a set of checkboxes to turn features on and off. So you're going to start seeing that approach more. And I'm glad because it does kind of clutter up the CSS, so you got more content that has to get downloaded and everything. But as you can see, all of these are exactly the same. But early on, most of the browsers won't support a non-prefix version of it, right? So that's why we still have the -moz and the -webkit and stuff like that on a lot of these things. You do it just to be safe, even though most of them at this point don't need the prefix. We still kind of do it to be safe. All right, so we talked about what rules are, what properties are. Another thing that's really common now is media queries. And this is where we can get into responsive design. We're going to talk a little bit about responsive design tonight. But basically, it's a way to put if clauses inside your CSS so that you can define rules inside of those media query if statements that get applied if the breakpoint or the condition is true. And the way you organize the file and everything allows it to cascade and override your default CSS properties and stuff. So when we're doing properties, when you get to measuring things, we need to put a unit associated with it, okay? And there's different kinds of units. This is just what I consider like the most common units that we use. There are probably about more than a dozen, maybe 15 or 16 different kind of units you could use. Most of them I rarely ever see used. The primary one that most developers go to is the pixel. And as last night's talk was about responsive design, one of the things that I'm trying to wean off of is using pixels for my measurement units because it's a fixed value. And when you're starting to do responsive design, you need to deal with fluidity and stretchiness and things like that. And so when you've got fixed amount of width and height and stuff like that, it can make it a lot more problematic to kind of maintain your sanity when you're doing responsive design. Instead, it's more common to use these next three, which is a percentage, an EM, and a rem. These are all kind of relative units. And obviously a percentage stretches based on the size that's available to it. So the bounding box of whatever element it is. Now, an EM is a measurement based on the font size. And so what you're telling it is, size yourself, like normally you do like one EM. It's the same size of one character in the font of the containing element, right? Now if you're applying this, say, to the font size, and you say like 1.5 EMs, what you're saying is make this font 1.5 times the size of what the parent element is sized at. And then anything inside of that, that 1.5 is now 1. And so it gets a little, you can get a little lost, a little inception in a way if you start trying to play with it. So what we've done is we've created this REM unit, which is called a relative EM. And what the difference is that its relativeness is to the root element or the body tag of your document. And that way you can kind of keep your sanity a little more if you start kind of playing with the font sizes of elements and you want to kind of make it based on something that's stable for you. So we can kind of get to this real element thing. I haven't done a whole lot where I've implemented the REM. It's one of the things I started trying to do a little bit over the summer. If you go through my codes and stuff like that, you'll still see a lot of pixel references. I'm slowly trying to wean myself off it, like I said. It does take a little bit of time to kind of get your brain enacted with it. Another one that's relatively new, that's starting to make a lot of appearances, is VH and VW. And that stands for viewport height and viewport width. So who knows what the viewport is? If you were there last night, you better answer. All right, what do you got?
Well, it's, maybe I don't know exactly what it is, but it's kind of like what's presented to the user, kind of, or, I mean, I don't know.
It's the real estate.
The real estate?
It's the real estate of the screen.
Not necessarily. You're on the right track though.
I think it seems like it's more of the device.
You're all close.
The browser window size.
The browser window size, the space it's got to render content in. So basically everything inside the browser Chrome. That's the viewport. So if you sit there and just resize your browser and your desktop, the viewport is going to change, okay? Because the width and the height is going to adjust as you move, resize the browser itself. So we've got these new values here, and this can be extremely valuable. And the place I'm seeing it used the most right now is with responsive images. And I'll try to touch on that a little bit later. But the reason why that's very valuable is with responsive images, you're trying to tell it how wide to render a certain image. And if you say 33 VH or VW, then it knows to render it a third of the width of the screen, not the screen, but the viewport of the actual browser that it's got available to render in. And so that can be a very valuable tool to kind of control the size of stuff. And another thing that a lot of developers don't realize is if you've got a measurement of 0, you don't need a unit because 0 is always 0 no matter if it's a percent, a pixel, a point, or an inch, a centimeter, it doesn't matter. It's 0, it's nothing. So save yourself a couple of characters and just say 0, okay? Yeah.
How supported is viewport across browsers? Because I learned about that recently and I'd like to use it, but every time I use it, I think, I don't know if this is going to be supported across all browsers.
It is supported across all browsers. So try to explain I have to go back to my history books a little bit, but so the history of the viewport stuff, the concept came out when the iPhone came out, basically. And so Apple just kind of created it. And the problem with Apple and the web is they don't really like standards bodies. And they don't like to participate in the standards bodies. They have a few engineers that are listed on there, but I know from talking to people who are on these standard bodies, they aren't really helpful, to be blunt. And if you come talk to me about touch, I'll tell you the stories about why touch is so critical in the web thanks to Apple. But so the deal is Apple created it, and then Android came along, and they said, well, they basically reverse engineered what they felt like the viewport was supposed to do in Safari, because Apple didn't want anybody to have code that they didn't for WebKit, which is kind of the opposite of what you're supposed to do with WebKit, in my opinion. So the good guys at Google kind of reverse engineered the concept of the viewport and support for the viewport tag based on what little documentation Safari had out there. It's not 100% correct. Meanwhile, the standardization body said, okay, we've got to do something around this. So they started writing a spec on it, and it's actually based in CSS. And that is the one that's generally supported. I don't know how Safari's doing with it. I just haven't looked on it in a while. Now, I haven't had any problems putting like the viewport meta tag in there, as well as usually I have a viewport property or rule in my CSS, but it's just been sitting there for a long. I've totally forgotten all about it, so thanks for bringing that up. So there has been some issues with that, especially I think early versions of like Windows Phone and Android were kind of quirky with it. It seems to have kind of stabilized at this point. It tends to be, I think, more of a problem on desktop than mobile devices at this point, because the viewport on those is always the screen width, but on desktop it's not necessarily right. But at this point, I think it's okay. I haven't had any issues in a few years with it, to be honest with you. It hadn't crossed my mind, but that's a good one to cover. I think I have a little bit on my book about viewport stuff, so I can't remember right.
Yeah, so you do recommend putting the meta tag and then the CSS?
Yeah, absolutely. If I get a chance, I'm going to go through the code here in a little bit. Maybe I'll see if I can dig it up, what's in the CSS. So. Great question. Any other questions? All right. Okay, so selector syntax. And it's very interesting. I never really understood or even comprehended or considered selector syntax until jQuery came out. And jQuery made me see that, wow, I can do a lot of interesting things with the selector syntax. And they were the ones that kind of created it. And of course, jQuery was kind of creative because we didn't have a good way to interact with the DOM at that point. And so Reza created an engine that went through and did all the XML parsing for us, is what he did. So because of the way he designed that to use the selector syntax, we have a standard based on that the browsers support. If you write a JavaScript, or I guess the actual API, it's document.query selector all, and by class names and all this kind of stuff. It's all generally based on selector syntax. And there's really three main ways that we kind of go after selecting elements. We can go select all the elements of a certain type directly. That's pretty easy. The better way is by classes, and this is generally the way you're going to want to do it. A popular way, which you really should not do, it's really bad practice, is by ID. Really need to try to wean yourself off IDs if you use those in your elements. It's actually a pretty bad practice. As we go through this little exercise here, maybe it'll make a little more sense to you why that's bad. But the main reason is because you can only have an ID to refer to a single element in the markup, right? And so any rule you define using an ID is over-specified, essentially, at that point. You can't reuse it very well. And so we'll talk about how to design this selectors with that.
So Chris, question.
Yeah.
So when you say try to avoid IDs, are you saying that if it's going to be a unique element,
Right.
create a unique class for that element rather than ID?
No, I'm going to talk about structuring your selectors here in a little bit. We'll get into BEM, and hopefully it'll make a little more sense because it allows you to be a lot more flexible with and reuse your rules and properties a lot more. Yes.
I also understand that IDs cause specificity issues.
Yes, that's what I said. They're over-specified. Yeah, because it's only targeting that one element, period.
So things don't always work with them.
Just
So
on
you
one
turn
element.
stuff off.
Well, it makes a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a lot more code to have to maintain and manage, and you get a lot of duplicate code that way.
Yeah, well, the way I've kind of seen it is, like, coming from a Java programming background and going into the CSS, I see that as like inheritance. Like you have a base class, which is the class, but you may have a specific instance which has unique properties.
Mm-hmm.
So
Make it a class instead of an ID that you're building that rule off of. Trust me on that.
okay.
Yeah, just trust me on that.
Just from a programmer's point of view, that has always tweaked me because you never, go back to the first stuff, you never want to deal with just one thing different than everything else. You
Right.
want everything to be as cohesive as possible.
Right.
It's just a good practice in life.
Yeah, it's a way to reuse code. And yeah, you may not reuse it anywhere else, but you can't predict what you're going to do. So that's the one thing about that I try to sell about responsive design. You can't predict what devices or interfaces we're going to be using in a year or two. So if you're designing for the context that you physically have in front of you and think that's going to be it, you're kind of hosing yourself right there. It's the same kind of concept. So Any other questions about this? All right. So as we get a little more advanced with the CSS selectors, you can nest selectors. So I can, and this is where you start getting into kind of towards this BEM that I'm talking about. But you can apply rules to children of matched elements, right? So you can have a class that's on a parent, and then you can find a child class or something like that down the chain that will select the elements inside of it, right? And we'll look at that. So here's an example. Like I generally would have like a main content for my main area of my spa, and maybe I want to apply a common style to any paragraph that's rendered in my application. So I would just do main content and then a P, and that will automatically select every paragraph element that's within the main content element, right? So that allows us to kind of nest these things. And like I've already said, try to be careful to avoid complexity. If you've got a selector that's this long, it's way over complex and way too specific. Another trick that is fun that I like to play with a lot, especially in my spa applications, is selecting things by attribute. And this could be very valuable, especially so like when I do spas, I kind of like the way Angular did their ng dash stuff, and the data dash stuff's been popular for a while. So my stuff, I have elements with spa dash things. So like this is something I use to when the application loads. I've got a module that goes through, parses out all the views and the templates, and I have them all in script tags. And I'm doing it in script tags until the template element becomes standard. And so to go through and grab all those scripts, parse out the markup, and store it in storage for me, and remove those from the DOM so they're not even there anymore. But that's how I go through and select them. Is I tell it what element to look for, and then inside these square brackets, I'm telling it look for the attribute class. In any attribute class that has a spa view value in it, select that element, and it goes through and it pulls it out for me. And so that allows me to pull all those without having to do some sort of crazy ID scheme or something like that that I've seen some other people do. So this makes it very flexible. So this is kind of another example, and I use this a lot on forums. Like if you kind of go through like Bootstrap and some of the other things, they'll do some similar stuff as far as finding the different input types. So this one finds all the input types of an email, and it changes the font color to blue. So when you're typing it, it makes it blue, for example. And maybe you want to have a green for a phone number or something like that. So you would type, type equal phone, make that green, and it's kind of a fun way to do some things. But it allows you to target those specific input types in this case with a particular style. Now you can get a little more fancy with it if you want to find everything it starts with. So if I wanted to do like spa dash, I could just put the little caret symbol here after class, and then I put spa dash in here, and it would find every element that had spa dash in it, and just select those and apply whatever rule need to be applied. In this case, we turn the color red. And then I can also do an ends with, or swap out that caret with the $sign. That tells the selector to find everything that ends with my class dash right there. So that's another valuable tool that you can have. And what now? VI? Okay. I never could use VI. We just a big black screen on it. What do I do now? That's weird. All right. So if you want to just do like a wildcard contains, so if you were doing like a general search, it'd be star something star star. This is how you do it. You do class star equal and then the term you want to look for, and then that'll find all those elements. So this is kind of some neat selecting that you can do. I'm going to tell you a little caveat about the selectors. They work at different speeds. If you actually do a real performance test, this is the one benefit that doing by ID has, is that it is the fastest selector. The problem is it overspecifies things. But class selectors are really fast. Things like this are a little more complex and they take a little bit longer for it to work. Now, generally you're not going to notice the speed hit, but if you did a test of like on JS Perf or something, and you did 10,000 iterations, you would notice this is, I forget, like let's say 25% slower or something like that. You would notice it at that level. But in general, it's not going to affect you that much. All right, so let's kind of apply this concept. We see a lot of sites that have social links on them, right? Okay, so here what I'm doing is I'm telling it to select every anchor tag that has an href value that has a google.com or facebook.com or twitter.com, and change the font color to kind of match that site's color scheme. Okay? So let's go look at that. Alright, so this is how I did this. Good. Awesome. Can everybody read the font, or do you need to make it bigger?
Bigger.
Bigger. Is that a little better? Sure. How's that? Can you see over there? Okay. All right, let's just go down to the markup. Now, I tend to when I contain things, I think Bootstrap tends to call them groups. I've always called them wrappers, so you can probably interchange the concepts in your head. But what I'm saying here is I just created a little element to wrap these anchor tags, and I don't have Bootstrap, I have Primer referenced in this particular demo. Primer is similar to Bootstrap. It's created by the same guy who created Bootstrap, except now he's at GitHub, and this is where he's created GitHub. And I'm using the Font Awesome icons. Who knows what Font Awesome is? Okay, it's a glyph icon set, and I just did a quick and dirty to do that. So and what it's going to do is it's going to render the particular logos inside of this anchor tag. And up here I've got the CSS rules that we just looked at in the slide deck, and here they are. And up here is just basically some markup or some rules to kind of define the shape and size and stuff. So if we launch this, we get the 3 logos up here, and that's just nothing but CSS and a custom font, right? And if we go right click on it, select the element, we can see that it's because we're in focus right now. When I selected it, turn that one off. But anyway, you can see that well, that really is blurry, isn't it? Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's a focus issue. But if you look up here, it's a lot clearer. Okay, so the first one up there is the button with the pseudo-class focus on it, and that's coming from the Primer framework. But below that, this one right here is that href wildcard looking thing that we just looked at, and that's where this color is getting applied to the particular Twitter one. If we went to the Facebook one, you can see that its color is kind of the dark blue that we're expecting. Here's where I'm kind of giving it some shape. Notice I'm using percentages here, so that it kind of makes it nice and flexy for us. So, and then here's the stuff you see that's coming from Primer and everything. So we'll talk a little bit about libraries towards the end. But that's really all that matters with this. If you look at the layout, you can see the size and everything to it. So because I'm just changing the color based on the target of the href attribute and the anchor tag. So you see this can be a fairly powerful little tool that you can leverage, right? So like if you just have a bunch of like, in this case, maybe you've got some marketing agreements with some partners, and every time you see their domain in any kind of your articles, you change the color to the corporate colors or something like that. In this case, like I'm doing here. So, you know, but obviously you can do a lot of other stuff with this. Are there any questions about the attributes? Okay, yeah.
So that's like the regex for CSS?
I would classify it sort of like the regex for CX for like C# and curly brace bracket languages. It's not really a regex expression though. So it's sort of the same concept. It's not near as powerful as a regular expression though. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned the nesting stuff. Do you have an example what are complex? You mentioned complex. Avoid complex.
I should have some examples in here. Let's see. No. Actually, I know what they are. Right here. So we've got the aside right here, okay?
You can make it up.
I can't. this feature. Okay. All right. So he wanted to know about the nested selectors. Okay. All right. So what I've got going on here is I've got this expand menu class in the main body tag up here, and I have. Let's get this out of the way. There's an aside over here, and this aside holds the navigation for the site. And when the expand menu class is present, and there's a child that matches the left panel class, then what I want to do is I want to move that left panel to 0 and make the width 220, and then the main content, I want to move that over from the left 220 pixels so that it's the exact width of the menu, right? So if we go look at it, this is the menu over here, and this is the main content area. Now, at this width, I make the menu just render, make it visible, but if I make it smaller, it's going to go away. Oh, you know what? It's the reason why it's open is because I was playing with the hamburger. There we go. All right, so now expand menu should be gone. Oh, come on, really? I have more issues when I'm on a projector than I normally do with the developer tools. See, some of those things I want to tell, I know the guy who runs the developer tools, ping him afterwards. So we can do it this way. So our body tag does not have, okay, so our left panel is still 220 pixels wide, but now it's left 220. But this hamburger menu up. Here we go. If I hit the hamburger menu, really, I fixed that. I literally fixed this. I was sitting there reading the interview. Okay. Let's try like this. See how it works? Okay. Let's see. Oh, good. Now we're back. All right, so I have the expand menu, and if I tap it, it goes away. Notice the class disappeared up here. So now when I go look at the aside, we're back to the default rules for it at this particular width. And so it makes it off the screen. And of course, the main content area is flush to the left. Okay. So all I'll do is just take focus on it.
Using JavaScript there?
Not really. The only thing I'm doing.
That's what I was going to ask, right?
Yeah. It's fine. I'll show you what I'm doing.
Very smooth, man. I like it.
Well, the animation is just a transition, so it's got an easy function and stuff. It's just a smooth animation. There we go. All right, so this is the JavaScript, and all I'm doing is adding or taking away that class to the body tag. So there's a JavaScript to trigger the class being added and taken away. Other than that, it's all CSS doing everything else. So, in fact, let's just kind of dive right over to it. Let me show you what's going on. So if we go to the left panel, so what we're seeing, what he was talking about is it was very smooth. And that one, and this one. See how it just kind of eases and announced it, just disappearing, displaying, or that kind of thing. It's just it's a transition. And so what we're doing is I'm telling it to on the left property, take 700 milliseconds, and then use an ease out easing function. There's a bunch of default easing functions. You can even define your own little algorithm if you know how to do the zero curve math and stuff like that. You could drop that in there. Just stick with the stock ones, so it should be fine. Now you can animate different properties at different with different easing functions at different times if you want to, or you can just say all, and it'll just apply the same easing to all properties that can be animated. Right? So in this case, when the left property changes, instead of going from 0 to 220 instantly, go from 0 to 220 pixels, or whatever, negative 220 to 0, over 700 milliseconds. That's kind of a sort of arbitrary number. I didn't want it to be a full second. I didn't want it to be almost instantaneous. 700 just felt kind of right. A lot of times with these kind of animations, play with them and see what feels right to you. And play with them on different devices, kind of feel what ultimately is going to be the best for you. If it's really slow on like a mobile phone, maybe you've got a media query around it, you make that transition 500 milliseconds, but on a desktop you make it 700. It may play out a little better for you. Just kind of fiddle with it and do that. But you can do ease out, ease in and out, and all kinds of stuff. I think there's about 7 or 8 default easing methods that I can think of off the top of my head. So, anybody not seen the transition stuff before?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, it's first kind of.
Yeah, this has been around for, I don't know, IE8 or IE9 time frame. So it's been around for a while. And you can also do transforms and stuff, which means you can like scale things and rotate them and things like that, which is pretty cool. So, yeah.
So I'm familiar with doing that with jQuery. I'm familiar with doing that with jQuery.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I didn't. I mean,
Yeah.
I hadn't caught up on being able to do it in CSS, but
Yeah.
I'm still concerned about that cross-browser compatibility.
Oh, they're all good. It's like
on the current browsers, but if we still have a
All
user
right.
base of.
All right. You talk about IE8? Okay. I want to give you a powerful message to take back to your work tomorrow. Microsoft is deprecating IE10 and below January 12th. They're not supporting them anymore. That's the only reason Internet 11 ships with Windows 10 is for enterprise mode. So when you've got these legacy sites that aren't ready for modern browsers, you can designate them to be used in enterprise mode, and it'll load it in the compatibility mode that you want, like IE8, IE9, IE10. But that's the only reason IE11 even shipped with Windows 10, was for the enterprise mode. So yeah, come January 12th, Microsoft is no longer supporting anything but Internet Explorer 11. And really for Internet Explorer 11, they're really only supporting enterprise mode is all they care about.
Yeah, I heard they're getting out the browser game.
What now?
I heard that Microsoft getting out the browser game. They're getting rid of it.
No, they're not.
No, they went to a new one.
It's not really a new one. They just trimmed the fat.
I know. They gave it a new name and it looks all pretty. And it has new icons and it's all pretty.
And I am using Edge, by the way. So, if you have any feedback about Edge, let me know and I'll pass it along to the rest of us. Your battery's getting killed because of it. I don't use Chrome when I'm on battery because my battery life on here with Chrome is 3 hours when I close Chrome, and I have to go in and kill the process actually, not just close it. My battery life goes up to over 10 hours. Big difference.
So what about old smartphones like Android 4.2?
Android
Gingerbread or something.
Yeah.
like that?
Okay, so the transitions and stuff on Androids should work just fine. I haven't had any problems with the older ones. The problems with the Androids is some of the newer APIs aren't supported, and people don't upgrade Androids. They just don't keep going forward. Plus, they just don't run the new operating systems. Heck, the newest devices can barely run the new versions of Android. It's really the browser. So like, I had to go get a Samsung 4S for a client I've got because his personal phone is a Samsung 4S, and the default Samsung browser is not that good, right? It doesn't. There's some things it doesn't support that I never dreamed it would support, like request animation frame. That's been supported by all the browsers for like 8 years now, but it for some reason doesn't support it, which I do a lot of stuff with request animation frame. So generally it doesn't bother me. And one of the tricks that I do, and I can show you, I talked a little bit about it last night, but it's more of a spa topic, is I cut the mustard. Basically I do some quick feature detection, and if it doesn't cut the mustard, then I give it a core site, which is like a classic version of the website with, I usually put Node JavaScript in it, and then just some basic CSS. And it's like your 2005 image website at that point. So if you go visit my blog and you've got IE8, IE9, you're going to get the core site instead of the spot. And it's just enough so that you can read the articles and get around enough. I don't put a lot of energy into it. So if you've got an existing legacy line of business application you're trying to replace, you can just bounce back to that one, but you can go forward and build a new one. It kind of works out nicely that way.
So you have to maintain two sets of stuff?
Yes and no. The way I look at it is in the next few years, the old browsers should pretty much deprecate out. The problem, like your Android problem, where that's going to be most issue is going to be like in development in countries, because the cheap Androids are super popular there. Because you can buy a lot of Android phones for like $10, $15 in developing countries. You know, and then those people live on those phones. That's their only connection to the internet is those phones. So, good questions. All right, let's see what's next on our agenda here. All right, again, sticking with the custom attribute type. This one is something that's kind of neat to do. I don't have the code because this is all you got to do really. But in WebKit browsers, it puts, when you're focused on an input field, it puts a border around it that's kind of annoying. And if you've got a marketing or advertising department, or you've got a brand guideline for your company, this is going to violate it. I can guarantee you that's going to violate somebody's rule of what they want something to look like. So to turn that off, you can say, type equal text focus. When it's focus, you're using the pseudoclass focus. You can say outline none. Okay, that will get rid of the outline in WebKit. So you won't have the blue is in Safari and the orange is for Chrome. And I don't know about what the color. I don't know if Opera's doing red, but I haven't actually checked. This is generally when people pay attention to this. This was something that bugged me a lot about 5 or 6 years ago, so it's good to get around it. All right. Okay, so we've already kind of looked at real quick a little bit of the pseudoclasses with the focus and stuff like that. And by and large, by now we should be using this because these have been around for a while, at least the core ones. So essentially what a pseudoclass does is it kind of extends how a rule gets applied to an element based on its current state. So the common ones we've had for a while are hover, and active. So we do that for a lot for hyperlinks or buttons and things like that. Or we can make things change colors or whatever by applying a different class to it, right? But there's some new ones too that I don't think a lot of developers are that familiar with. Before and after in particular, it allows you to set the style for a kind of a ghost element before and after an element. Okay, the element's not actually in the DOM, but it allows you to specify the properties of that element to be rendered, even though it doesn't necessarily exist. But it's actually neat what some of the things you can do with it, and I'll show you here in a minute one of the things that I like to do with it. Another one is the int element stuff. There's several variations of this. So you'll see things like int type, right? So if you've got, say, a list, like an li list, and you want to apply different rules as you go down to the different, each one, you can just specify it with a number here. And it starts off, basically you're saying the number of preceding sibling elements with it. So the first one's going to be 0, the second one's going to be 1. So it's basically a 0-based array that you're going through. And that'll give you the power to kind of apply some different rules to the elements. So if you've got something where you want things to list side by side, say 3 at a time, and then go down to the next row, you can say, the third one, give it a margin enough so that it forces it to go down to the next row or something like that. I've seen, various kind of tricks like that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Kind of from yesterday, I was using int type, and I was trying to do int of the class, basically.
Yeah.
I figured out that's kind of impossible. I guess, but it's not really. Or how would you do that without using JavaScript?
Oh god, int class. So you're saying like,
so basically, they're
not necessarily siblings, but it's here, and it's here.
Yeah, it's like the third, the sixth, the ninth time the class is used.
I have no clue how to do that off the top of my head.
I achieved it by making them all figures, like use the figure type and just read all that stuff.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
That's a good scenario, but I haven't figured that one out.
I'm trying to figure out CSS and what to do that.
I want to say somewhere in the last 4 years I did something like that.
Really?
I can't remember how I did it.
Yeah, it's like.
And I can't remember how I did
I've
do it.
seen it too, and I'm just sitting here trying to remember how you do it. It's in Code Academy, because they do a lot of weird stuff like that in Code Academy. So if you go back and look at it, it'll show it.
Yeah.
You can also do animation keyframes with that. And
Yeah,
like
we're talking about animations a little bit, yeah.
Stack stuff and use int
Yeah.
element for that.
Yeah. I'm not showing something that fancy, but yeah.
This CSS?
Yeah.
Yeah, it shows how to do the ends.
Okay. All right. Oh, the content property. So this is another kind of nifty property that you can set in CSS, and we're going to look at a neat trick that uses. But basically, you can define the text that's rendered in matched element, which is kind of interesting because there's. If you look at the DOM, the text isn't there, but it's defined in CSS, which can be kind of spooky anyway. You're trying to debug something. And like I said, it's actually useful with the before and after. I see it used there most to kind of give content to things. All right, so I want to try to use some of these, and this isn't something I came up with. It's something Chris Coyier came up with. Chris Coyier is kind of like one of the leading experts on CSS. He's got the site css-tricks.com. And he's got like a great video series and all this kind of stuff on it. But question that I get asked all the time by customers and people at talks, and especially around responsive design, is how do I deal with tables? Now, I honestly have not used a table tag in like 4 or 5 years, and that freaks people out, especially back-end developers, because that's how we do tables, right? But tables are not responsive friendly, and it can be a real pain. So when I started doing mobile first web development back in 2010, I really learned the pain of it really quick, and I had to come up with a solution fast for the particular project. And I said, forget it. I'm just going to make a list of divs with span tags and stuff inside of each of the divs, and just repeat those, and make a pseudo table without the table elements. Now, there are some other advantages to that. Tables render very slowly, because the browser waits till all the content of the table is read and parsed before it even starts rendering the markup. This is one of the reasons why we don't do table layouts, is because their sites would be loaded, but because of the rendering process involved with tables, it would delay another second or two before the content even starts being rendered. So that's one of the reasons why we left table layouts behind. And the same goes true with that. So that gives you a little advantage of your content getting rendered faster. The other advantage of using divs and spans and things like that is you can control things better with CSS to make a table structure render appropriately for different kind of screen sizes that we're using. Plus you can hide and show values and stuff a little bit faster. But I still have a lot of clients that do want to use tables because that's the only way that they can comprehend that you should semantically lay their data out. The problem is they want it to render on a cell phone, and they've got a table that's 40 columns wide. Okay, that doesn't work very well. So one trick that I've tried, and I hate it, is wrapping that table inside of a div element that's scrollable horizontal, and just allowing the person to go back and forth. It's not a great solution. But some customers that just demand that you have a traditional table on the screen, it's might be your only option to meet their criteria. Their customers are not going to be happy, but the stakeholder will be for the time being. But I always try to explain to them what they're trading off so that they don't get themselves in trouble. If you want to go to the article that I pulled this from, this is the URL. It's responsive-data-tables on the CSS Trick site. But what you're really trying to do is you're changing the display properties of the table from the default table display property to more of a block style property. And that allows you to essentially turn that into divs and spans at that point.
Hey Chris?
Yeah.
What's the name of the expert, CSS expert?
Chris Coyier. Coyier. C-O-Y-E-R. I think is how you say that. It's all over CSS-Tricks.
That was actually,
Yeah. So this is what it ultimately looks like. So you would have a traditional table. It would have these column headers up there. So what he's done is he's changed it via CSS, and he's created faux labels using that content property. And then here are the values for the cells, and he's hidden the actual table header. In fact, he even moved it off the viewport. And so this just, as you scroll back through, all the labels just keep repeating over and over again. It's, in my opinion, it's a little better than the scrolling back and forth solution, but at the same time, I don't really like the fact that it's half the screen is the value and half the screen is the label, and the labels just keep repeating. To me, that's sort of inefficient, but I think it's a little better than what we had before. So
Also transposes it kind of, you're saying instead of it being like that.
Yeah, it turns it, makes it all vertical, right?
I got you.
And so the reason why we put the labels in is so you at least know what that field relates to, right? So in a way it's good. It's one of those things, do I show the label or not? It honestly depends on the kind of data that I have. If it's something I can represent with icons or things like that, you know, I try to represent that stuff. So like I've got a customer right now, and it's a monitoring application. So they have different states, right? So it basically goes from green all the way up to red over a scale of 10, right? So I use colors to indicate the severity, and I never have to display that severity value anywhere. It's just visible, and so they know what's going on. All right, we're going to look at the code a little bit. Let me just kind of bounce through this real quick because it doesn't really look that great in here. But what we're using here is we're going to use some media queries. So anything, in this case, max width. Oh yeah, so we got max width 760 pixels. So anything less than 760 pixels. And if you read my talk last time on responsive design, I never go max width. I always go min width and make the default and then change it. When you go this way, you wind up with a whole lot more CSS to manage, and you also wind up with more crap you have to maintain on the pages too. Just the way information planning goes. Anyway, so like I said, he's changing it to display block, which turns it from a table into like more of a div at this point. So, and then we're using this nth typo that I just talked about, and the content property. So this is another reason why I like this demo. It does demonstrate this. So here we're saying, essentially, the first element, the before element, and the content, make the content first thing. So this is applying the labels for each one of the fields, or the columns, right? And this is the way to do it without having to have the elements actually rendered out. You can just define it in CSS and make it automatically repeat for you. So that it keeps you from having to write the markup and have it rendered, right? So this is really good. And we'll come back to that. Just want to make sure where I was there. Okay, so let's go look at this. And there we go. Okay. So this is really porn name. Okay, we're gonna vet these. Okay. So we've got a traditional table here with zebra striping and everything, right? All right. And that's kind of the boring corporate looking table, but the CEO wants to look at it on his iPhone, and this is what he's going to get. See how it just naturally transitioned?
That's cool.
Yeah, that was fun.
So like I said, it's a whole lot better than scrolling the crap back and forth, but it's not the best thing for me here, but it works, and I think this is a good compromise solution, to be honest with you. So, all right, so you want to see kind of behind the scenes what's going on?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
That's how you use Dave?
What?
You use Dave.
I used did no, I did not. No.
No?
No, this is still a table. It just changed
okay.
the rendering property, the display property from the normal table property to be a. Yeah, there we go. So here it changes the default to block, and
We can't see it back.
Yeah, we can't see it.
in the back.
Can
Can you see it back there now?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So if I turn this off, we're going back to being a table, and that looks ugly, right? If I can scroll this way a little bit, man, that looks ugly. Well, when I change it to block, it turns it into more of a divvy kind of thing, okay? Now the head is display block at the top. Yeah. So here he's applying this rule so that the position is absolute, and he's moving it way off the screen so that it's nowhere to be rendered or visible at this point, okay? So that's the normal row header up there. And then inside, see if there's any special rules here. It's just zebra striping. Again, he's using the M type of for zebra striping. And I don't know why this is a bug in the edges. edge tool here, but the content, notice it has first name here, but notice it's using the pseudoclass before, and so that pseudoclass is having that first name rendered there. And if we look at, well, it's all the pseudoclasses for some reason it does this. Notice the width is 45%, and we've got a little bit of kind of some faux margins being defined. We have padding on the top and left because it's using absolute positioning. I'll talk a little bit about absolute positioning in a little bit. But here we got the padding left is 50%. That makes it move over the content enough so that content before can render nicely and have enough buffer and everything. So basically, he's just kind of making it space out correctly is what he's doing. So, but by changing it from like a table layout to the display block, it turns it more into a div, and you got a little more control over it this way. So that makes it line up the vertically. Remember, if it was inline block, let's go play with that and see what that does to it. So I haven't played with that. Inline block would probably make it line up a little funky.
So then before is not actually rendered inside the table cell, it's before the table cell.
Yes, and it's a pseudoclass. It's not in the DOM. So if you go look, see there's no element before it that it's doing. It's a fake element, but because you've applied styles, the browser renders whatever you've done there. Okay. So it's a neat trick. Any questions about this? All right. Well, on we go. Okay. So I mentioned earlier about selector specificity, and this is a really big problem. And I don't care if you're a developer or designer, I see this violated all the time. Is making really complex selectors for your rules. So let's look at some of these. This is main content, any direct descendant that's an article that has an ID of my article ID, and then the paragraphs inside that. That's all you really needed in this case was my article ID and a paragraph. This other part never even gets read by the browser. This is something that most people don't realize. How does a browser parse a selector? How does it read it? Ah, see? It reads it right to left, not left to right like we normally would read it. So the first thing it does is it says, find all paragraphs. So it finds every paragraph in the DOM. And it says find all paragraph, then it goes, find this element and then parse out the paragraphs that are part of that element. And then it knows at that point it can't go any further because there's only one element on the page that has this, so it never even reads these parts over here. All right. So when you've got these, like I said, when you've got these over-specified rules, you want to get in a large base of CSS because you don't reuse properties very well. Instead, think about things as a small component, and then kind of reuse attributes of it as much as you possibly can. And what happens is you wind up having a much smaller CSS code base, and it's much more reusable.
Well, what about sections like header, body, footer, navigation? You
Absolutely.
one of those.
Let's look at the next slide. Okay. I even had it up here. Browsers read them right to left, and no one got that. All right. Oh, another point.
Oh.
Try to avoid the universal selector because it takes a lot of processing for the browser to do it. Generally, like the resets or the libraries with the reset built in have a universal selector to set the box sizing on every element so you have consistent box sizing. That's about as much as you need to use the star. Okay, stay away from that as much as you can. Yeah.
Would you use it in the body tag or
No, the universal selector is.
No, I don't mean the universal. I mean, so I want to set the font size to 18 instead of 16.
Oh yeah. I generally set that. Here, I should have this. It's probably the reset. I'm probably duplicating it here. But yeah, normalizing the box model. So we've had problems in the past with browsers having different box models. This normalizes them all to border box, which is what you really want. What he's talking about is setting the font size. I set it on the HTML element and set the font size. It's kind of the de facto standard. It's not something I came up with to set it to 100%. So, and we'll talk about supposed to inventory.
like 100% rather than 62.5?
You know, 62.5 is another number. I don't know. It's just the number I probably saw and I just stuck with it.
For typographer, it's such an
162.5.
easy thing
Yeah.
to transition from pixel to
Yeah.
round if you use the 62.
I'm going to start playing with it. I actually read that again this week. It's the first time in a long time I've read about that. So
It's easier to teach to students. too.
okay. Yeah. 62.5 is like the 16 pixel to 24 point or something like that
Yeah.
ratio or something. Yeah. I'm trying to learn a little bit of typography to make myself better there because I think that's a big part of design is the typography part. I'm really weak there, so I'm not.
So the nice thing is if you do font size 12 pixel, the easy conversion is 1.2 rem.
Okay.
Because you're using 62.5.
Okay.
So you don't even have to think about it.
See, there's math involved in the art. Easy to read. I'm serious. It really is math involved in the art. And that's, like I said, I'm trying to learn some typography stuff right now because I think it's very important. Okay, like I said, the right to left rule, what we just looked at translates just to the ID in the paragraph. So I like to say, think more like a browser when you're defining your selectors. Think how are they going to organize this stuff. So something I learned over the summer by asking some questions to the Edge team about different kind of selectors and things like that. But really about media queries is what I started it on. And so they told me the way that browsers work, and I actually confirmed because I found some content some of the Chrome engineers have published, is they go through and parse all the CSS rules and media queries and put those into hash values. There's a big hash table that it builds. And obviously the smaller that hash table, the faster it's going to run. If you got a really large hash table, it takes longer for it to cycle through to find everything. So when you start thinking like that, you start thinking, how can I make the browser's life a little easier? You start writing your CSS and you know about how the JavaScript works, you start doing the same thing there. And your CSS becomes a lot smaller and a lot easier to build and maintain. So little tricks like this, understanding the browser reads right to left, lets you start thinking about how the browser is going to read my selector, and you know how to make it a little faster. All right, so talking about the specificity, there's actually a formula to figure out the specificity of a particular rule. And it breaks down into basically 4 bits, all right? And then bits kind of not the right term for you, you'll see here in a second, but the first order is it an inline style? You don't want to use inline styles because they don't get cached and various other things. So you want to avoid inline styles because that's super specific because it's only going to apply to that particular element no matter what. The next level down is using an ID selector because again, it's only going to apply to a single element. Okay? And then the next one is count the number of class selectors, attribute selectors, and pseudoclasses in a particular selector. And then that's the third level down. And then the last one is count the type of selectors and pseudo elements in a particular selector. And again, ignore the universal selector, it doesn't count against your specificity, but it's a totally different rule at that point. So what does this look like? Well, I found a little calculator that visualizes it nicely, so I just took a screenshot of one yesterday. And this is specificity.keegan.st, keegan.st, all right. But I like this because it kind of color codes it so you can see this. And what you want is you want as small a number as possible. If you get anything in the thousands, obviously it's over-specified. Well, you're only going to have, if you've got an inline style, it's going to be 1 here. You can't have 2 inline styles. So it's going to be 1. And then, if it's got an ID and it's an inline style, it's bad too. But the higher it gets, the more trouble you've got going on. And I thought I had a graph in here. Okay, I don't. There are places out there that will do a graph for you of your entire style sheet, right? If you've got big spikes in it, that's a bad sign. Or if everything's really high, that's a really bad sign that your CSS is out of whack. So you want to try to avoid that. So what we try to do is you want to try to use this BEM naming convention. That stands for block, element, and modifier, okay? And if you looked at Bootstrap and Primer, created by the same guy, and some of the other really good CSS frameworks that are out there, they all follow this model. And if you've also heard of SCSS, it's basically object-oriented CSS, but you don't hear people talking about that as much anymore. it essentially follows that concept as well, pretty closely, I think. So when it was kind of interesting when Bootstrap came out, everybody's like, "Do you use Bootstrap?" And I'm like, "No, why?" And so obviously I started looking at it, and I'm like, "Huh, this looks pretty much like the CSS that I normally use. They've got some slightly different naming conventions as far as terms, but it's structured very close to the way I build stuff." So that made me feel good. But Bootstrap is structured extremely well from a CSS point of view. I do like Bootstrap, I just don't like using all of Bootstrap. I'll cover that a little bit too. But the way those libraries are structured are very good examples of using this BEM. So if you use a button with Bootstrap, you're going to put the class .btn on your element. And if you look at the CSS, there's a whole group of related classes that kind of cascade off of that, right? So you've got button-primary, and then there's button-default, there's button-error, and all they're doing is really just changing the colors, to be honest with you. And then here we've got a pseudoclass button disabled, and then we've got the -XX and MDs and stuff like that to kind of control the size of the buttons. So they have specific properties that they're trying to modify, right? So that's what we call it, a modifier, right? So another thing, when you start doing research on this, you see some people that like to use double underscores. I don't personally like that. I like the dash style like Bootstrap has. So when you look at the way the Bootstrap stuff looks, you can get a series of buttons like these down here that you can just go straight to the Get Bootstrap site, and this is how they demo it. But you look at the markup there, and we've got a class BTN. This one's just -primary, this one's -success, -info, -warning. And all that's doing is just changing the color, the background color. It's all those are doing. All right. So that's how it's modifying. If I wanted to say make it really big, we could put the BTN-XL or something like that in there and make it bigger than just the default, or we can make it small, all these different kind of things. Right? So the deal is that the BTN defines the core button concepts, and then the other ones just modify that to give it a slight variation so that it further tells us what's going on. All right. So does this make sense? We're going to look at, of course, I have a Bootstrap open here somewhere. Which primer? Put it up yesterday. There it is. Okay. So if we go look at the, this is their button less file. I don't know if I can make these bigger. Oh, I can. I don't use lines. So here's the button class. And if you understand how less, I can't remember if this is less or C, this is less now. Basically what we're doing here is we're defining the core properties in the rule, and then we've got some like child rules that we're defining off of this too, based on the pseudoclasses. Oh, I should move that up so you can see it. So in this case, this is a little less syntax here, but so for the focus, we're setting the color to the button default color value, which is set in the variables file and stuff. Who's familiar with less or SAS? All right, just a real quick, because I'm not going to cover this really tonight. We call these preprocessors. It allows you to, you'll have a little better programmatic control over variables, and you can define some functions, and these frameworks are really built heavily on top of these. So you have like a grunt or a gulp task that runs and processes your less files and turns them into CSS for you. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the less, which gets turned into CSS. So it doesn't look quite like CSS, but if you look at it enough, it makes logical sense to you. So here's the active. You put a box shadow on it. It just kind of changes things a little bit for us. And then here, like we're talking about the alternate buttons, different colors and side borders and stuff like that being applied to them. Like I said, these are the less functions that just, all that's doing is taking those variables and creating a straight up set of properties for us. And where these functions can come in handy, I'll talk about a little later, is you want to have an order to how you define your properties in the rules. So when you look at your CSS, it makes a lot more logical sense. You get used to seeing the certain order of properties. And when you've got a team of developers, it makes your code very consistent, so you don't have to, it's a little less cognitive load when you're looking at this stuff, and it's good practice. So these functions help you stay within those parameters and have that consistency. So anyway, so you can kind of see how this is structured inside of Bootstrap, and I want to encourage you, whether it's JavaScript or CSS, and you find a library or a framework that you like, go in and look at the code and see how they do stuff. You'll learn a ton of stuff. One of the most valuable things that I did, Paul Irish has a couple of videos. 10 things I learned by studying jQuery and 11 more things I learned by studying jQuery. I learned a lot of neat little tricks of writing JavaScript by watching those videos, including how to make my own jQuery base from hand, and that turned out to be super valuable to me. So, 10 things I learned by looking at the jQuery source, and 11 more things I learned by looking at the jQuery source. It's Paul Irish, who works for the Google Chrome team.
He used to be with Google.
All right. So, are there any questions about BEM? It's a very valuable way to write your code. You'll come up with a lot cleaner CSS. What now? I haven't written anything about BEM on the blog.
On the website, there's a link that pops up.
Maybe this week I have put something up there.
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay. All right. Good enough. All right. Yeah, this should be pretty well understood. In CSS, it's cascading. That's what the cascading style sheet. That's where you get CSS from, right? But really, what that means is that the last rule wins. But it also means that the most specified rule wins as well. Okay, and this can cause problems. This is one of the things that does lead to over specificity, is not understanding the order of how rules get applied. And this is where the developer tools come in real valuable. So if you look here, this top is the last rule that matched that particular element that we're focused in on over here. And as you go down, you can see where the base came from. So at the bottom, it starts at the universal selector, and then we look at the TD and the TH, and they always tell us where this came from. I believe this is this is the built-in, but I copied the demo. So it's not, I don't normally call my CSS file style. So, but anyway, you get to see how it flows through the chart. Another thing that you can do is look at this computed value, and if you expand this out, it shows you the trail of how that property was set and how it was overridden. And this will allow you to kind of see how the cascading mechanisms work, so that you can figure out what rule is causing your element to be blue instead of red like you expect. You can at least look over here and say, okay, well, I want it to be this color right here, but why is it gray? Well, I can see that I've got something that's overriding. I got something defined twice in this stack right here. So something later down in the marching order more or less is taking over. So this is these are defined inline up there in the main block, and they're overriding the style sheet that's being loaded before that. Okay, even though they're all the same, basically the same TD element selector, so you can kind of see where they're getting overridden. All right, so responsive design. I did a whole talk about it last night, and I used this quote in there along with some other ones. But the main thing about this is, back in the day, we got to the point where we said, okay, everything's 960 pixels, because 960 pixels just seems like a good compromise, because we have some people at 1024, but we still have a few people at 800 by 600, and we'll just say 960 pixels because that just feels good. It feels like it's wide enough. But I like the way Jeremy Keith coins or enunciates here. He calls this a consensual hallucination. The fact that we as a group of developers decided together to make a de facto standard, and assuming that the world was not going to move at all, and we were all going to be working on these 1024 by 768 screens for the foreseeable future. The reality is, though, once we kind of picked that 960 pixel thing, Apple came out with the iPhone, and everything changed. So all of a sudden, we've got new devices to play with. So, I've got one phone, I've got a Surface, I've got an iPad, I've got, what else do I have in here? Oh, here we go. I've got a Samsung Galaxy, I have an Nexus 7, I have several other devices that I didn't bring with me tonight, and more at home. I am a mobile device lab who has TSA pre-check just so I don't have to take the devices out of the bag anymore. I have gotten some funny looks by TSA agents over the years. I do encourage you to try to build your own little device lab or get your company to build one for you. You can do it relatively cheaply. I'm not the richest person in the world, and I've got tons of devices. The Samsung Galaxy I got for probably one of the more expensive devices. I've got one with the iPhones. That was $300. Most Androids are fairly cheap. I got that one in particular, like I said, my customer was on it, and I didn't have a Samsung browser to verify his craziness. But it was $300, but I got it at Walmart, and it's on the T-Mobile pay-as-you-go kind of thing, so I didn't have to get you don't have to get cellular plans for all these things either. Although I do like the fact that I've got the T-Mobile option, because that allows me to go out and actually play with it on a moderately slow, moderately fast broadband or cable or cellular network. Always test things over a cellular network or slow network, because you'll radically see your application in a totally different experience. Localhost is extremely deceptive. I always try to do it over a slow connection and a slow device too. So anyway, so what Jeremy's talking about here is we kind of decided, okay, we're going to make 960 pixels, and that's what we're going to go with. Okay, well that's a problem, because now we've got screen sizes all over the map. And I love this picture. I use this in a lot of presentations. I was taking it at a Breaking Development Conference a few years ago. And what they do is they had all of the attendees just order all their devices kind of by size in this kind of orbital array thing. And then they all got out there and like took pictures. I love this. I call this one device nirvana, because he's like, oh. But also we got cell phones here, and then we go into tablets and then laptops. And this is what people brought to a conference. And obviously I wasn't at that conference because there'd be a lot more devices there. But the thing about most people, I'm looking around, you have laptops, and you probably have some desktops at home. Who's got an Xbox or a PS4? Okay, who has a Wii? All right, you've got browsers on those things, and like the Internet Explorer on the Xbox, it works with Kinect, by the way. All right, so all kinds of new things there. I mentioned last night, I can see in the near future, we're probably going to have stuff coming from a browser that's being projected on our windshields in our cars. We've got iWatches and other things like this. I've got a band. I keep pestering the Edge team, like, is there going to be a browser on here? And they just go, but the reality is, you can actually create an RSS feed to read stuff on your blog and set it up on here. And they're getting it set up so you can start getting web content on things like this. This is a radically different kind of user experience compared to something with a normal screen. Okay? If you were there last night, don't answer it. But anybody know what this device is right here?
It's a game.
Yeah, it's a game. Do you know which one it is?
No, I'm forgetting that.
It's okay.
My nieces have it.
Your nieces,
The
that's
Disney.
Right. It's a Disney Infinity or something.
Yeah, they said Disney Infinity.
Yeah, so it's a Disney Infinity.
Marvel.
It's got a browser on it. Anybody know what this lime green thing is right here?
Or the $100 jump phone?
Yeah.
I think it's a Leap Motion. It's got a browser on it. But think about our refrigerators and all this IoT stuff. They're coming with browsers. Okay. By the way, did you know you can run the Edge JavaScript engine on what are the Raspberry Pis?
Yeah.
Yes. You can just run this. I just don't have the bandwidth for it.
I'm not a Pi person either.
So I know we're concentrating very much on mobile. What about the other way, like the TVs, the 1200, the gamer platform?
Well, if you were there last night, you saw that I got a picture of a big TV too. Yeah. But yeah, you got the big screen kiosk and things like that that are coming in place. Think about trying to design something that's going to be in Times Square. You know? There's no reason why that can't be a browser rendering markup either. To be honest with you. The thing is, the real point is, you don't have control over the device dimensions or even the way people can interact with it, to be honest with you. So the best thing to do is try to start thinking outside the box a little bit. Yeah?
Well, one of the things we've come across on the projects that we've done is, apart from responsive web design, is also taking in consideration for people with disabilities.
You know, that's very interesting you bring that up. I had lunch with my brother-in-law, and that's what he's working on right now.
Yeah.
Because
you might have a responsive web, but guess what? Now, because you have to be able to support somebody who needs the text to be, 20 pixels high,
Yeah.
responsive web doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have any content for that though, but it was kind of interesting. I didn't know he was working on that right now because he's been working on backend stuff, and they were just giving him some busy work to do and trying to do that. So, yeah.
Is there areas, because I'm really interested in the disability side of the net, because
Okay.
I've seen a number of folks with disabilities use it and use it well and effectively, but I don't see much written about it, and especially for designers.
You're absolutely right. There's not a whole lot of talks that I've come across. There was one at the Austin JS conference, I think last year. The guy did was really good. I don't want to say off the top of my head, there's a few things I'm thinking about, but you're absolutely right. When I was having lunch with him today, I was thinking, we just don't have enough content to talk about the details of it. What is it? It's like Bobby 305,
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few people that are pretty passionate about it, but it's just not mainstream. I think most developers are just struggling to do the basics. And that's kind of like, well, if we got time, we'll do something like that. But you can seriously get sued big time. Like my wife's company got sued. But she works for the Law School Admission Council. And they had a person who's blind trying to apply to school, and they do all the online applications for all law schools, and it's completely unusable.
Right, and a lot of visual designers just ignore it.
Right.
And I always tell my students that's not right.
Yeah.
It's the big equalizer. You need a design for it, universal.
Yeah, I was actually sitting there at lunch thinking I probably should come back Friday and just hang out with these guys to see what's going on. So, great stuff, yeah.
Yeah, we actually have, I work for Southwest, and we have two.
Oh, thank God, somebody from Southwest finally comes to my talks.
That's what he asked.
And so I'm actually working on versions of, I work in the Southwest Airlines University, their training department, and we have an active project where we have I guess the we've all cited version, a version for Magic, which is a screen reader, and one for JAWS. Okay. And it'll blow your mind because there's no way you can just.
See, I want to like set up like JAWS to develop with, but it's so expensive to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Firefox, they have a program called Bangs, and it just has the same output that would be outputted to JAWS.
Oh, really?
And it's in text.
It's called Bangs?
Bangs, F-A-N-G.
Bangs. Yeah. Okay. This is great. It's amazing this has come up so much today. I mean, so.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like how to present the material, I mean, it's like three separate things. Yeah. Because you can't even. So you can't make one thing that meets all three. You've got to.
I think you can, actually. I mean, our sites just follow the WCAG standard, which is the W3C, and the M's is a pretty important feature of the text fonts because you can increase the size, and they can increase it in the browser pretty easily to magnify. But I mean, as long as you have the proper labels, titles, and alt tags and everything, and you're able to tab throughout all the content, I mean, any site could be completely accessible.
I think you're right. I think it goes along with a lot of people don't think you can make everything responsive. I totally disagree. Sometimes you got to just rethink the way you order and lay out stuff in a totally different way. So the classic 2005 version of your website is not really something that's going to be easy to be responsive. But if you rethink stuff and you kind of apply modern design trends, you're probably going to be better off. You had something to say?
Yeah, I mean, and I think accessibility even kind of stretches even beyond those who need it. I mean, kind of taking your Apple Watch example, I mean, it's going to be difficult as we get more and more connected. Right. We may not always use these traditional types of media. I mean, if you wanted to read an article, I could see where it'd be really hard from here, but just sending it to whatever your earphones.
Yeah, I mean, when I get text on here, it's like one word at a time.
I mean, we're already using podcasts. We're getting used to now consuming more information just hearing it. Yeah. So having that always at the forefront of your mind, I think it goes well beyond those who are just, who can't visually see it, but I think it's going to kind of dovetail with that responsive web as we keep getting more and more connected.
I bet there's some SEO benefit too.
Yeah, actually.
Well, in general, SEO, if you make it more usable for people, I think it's what little I do know about accessibility stuff. When you do apply that, you make it more usable in general for people, which ultimately affects your SEO because people don't, go back to the search engine and go to the next one. because search engines track that, and that's one of the things that dings you, right? So you,
yeah, the heading tags for is really important for SEO, but the screen readers will list out all the headings, tags in a page, and all the links,
right,
and all the form fields, and it really goes hand in hand with the SEO for the page as well.
So it's one of those things. It does have big benefits, I think, that cascade to other areas of what you're working on.
There is a site, by the way, and I want to say it's usability.org. I think
you're right.
it's sponsored by the government. Excellent guidelines there.
Usability.gov.
Is that it? Usability.gov.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
What's that website?
Usability.gov. If you haven't been on there, it's excellent. And I always recommend people to go and read about alt text because that gets abused constantly.
Leave it out.
Well, it's a slow start. All right, let's go on. Okay, real quick about responsive design. It's sort of been around for a while. We didn't really know what it was. Ethan Markup was the first one to kind of define what it is and kind of like the article of articles about it. Nice bitly. I'll have the slide deck up. If you go get my responsive design deck from last night, it's got the link in there. Or you can just look it up, Ethan Markup on the listed part. But back in May 2010 is when he published the article and kind of started that. Essentially what it is, it's a design, it's an approach for design to fit all possible viewports, all right, to make it truly usable across any kind of device that people can come up with. And it relies on fluid layouts, which I love. And I used to overcomplicate the process, and now I learned how to do it very simply. That's what I'm going to show you here in a second. And of course, it relies on media queries to define rules based on these breakpoints or if statements in your CSS. So that's kind of how the cascading works, is using these media queries. And I always say minimal JavaScript is required. I'm using less and less JavaScript, primarily because we're at a transition point right now where responsive images are starting to be supported by the browsers, because most of the JavaScript I wrote to do responsive stuff was around setting the image source property based on the viewport and doing that in JavaScript. Thanks to responsive images, I'm able to start getting away from that. The bigger problem is creating different sizes and versions of the images. So, all right, I want to talk about fluid layouts, which is something I meant to do last time, totally skipped over, so we're going to get to go over that tonight. But basically what we're doing is we're taking advantage of the part, what we have to render content in. And I think it serves as the basic layout, the foundation for our layout. And to me, I create a native-like experience the way I go about doing it. I like to stick to the user design guidelines that the different platforms like Microsoft and Apple and Android have out there for like, here's how you should design apps. They've all kind of gone to something similar around the flat UI kind of design. And there's certain elements and aspects of it. And I like it because I know that they've done usability research that I don't have the resources to go out and do. The other side of it is I do pay attention to a lot of UX research, like I knew it last night. Jacob Nielsen and a bunch of those folks. Luke Holbuski's done massive amounts of research that he shared about usability. So I try to apply as much of that knowledge as I possibly can. Now the trick to doing fluid layouts is to leverage absolute position, and this is what just when I figured this out, it was just like one of those, oh, you gotta be kidding me on this, because I've been beating myself against the wall trying to use JavaScript to do stuff. And the reason why I had done that is because I was breaking apart how jQuery Mobile was trying to accomplish some of these feats. And jQuery Mobile was using a lot of JavaScript, and that's why when you have a jQuery Mobile site, you see a lot of skipping, the elements like skipping down and jumping up and stuff like that. It's because they're using JavaScript instead of letting the browser handle it with CSS. And that's kind of an example of a common problem I see, is developers tend to overuse JavaScript to do stuff that CSS can do. You were talking about, you didn't know about the transitions for the animations, and we've been trying to do it with jQuery. Well, you don't have to do it with jQuery anymore. And then the other trick that I've learned to mellow with it is using overflow scrolling to allow me to scroll content. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my little furniture site. Here we go. Which I want to caveat my little furniture site here. I had to write this site in about 2 days, and 3/4 of those 2 days I was creating fake data, so some buggy things going on. All right, but it serves as a good example of kind of how I handle some of this stuff. Just get the head out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it highlight the element that we're on. So up here at the top, this is the header element, and this is going to be essentially a fixed position element for me on any screen size. And what I've done is I've used absolute positioning and told it to just basically cling onto the sides and stick your head to the very top, and you're going to be a certain number of pixels tall. And so basically it's going to stay there, and as I stretch this, it's not going to go down anymore. I can't remember if I actually shrink the height or not. Yeah, the height doesn't change. I think I just made it 80 pixels. A lot of times on these sites, I'll make it smaller for the smaller screen size, the height-wise, but it sticks to the sides there, and that's a real important thing to have, because what a lot of developers try to do is that you try to use fixed positioning. Fixed positioning pretty much is broken on touch devices and screens like phones and tablets, and it's a little odd technical thing. I'm not really good at explaining, so I'm not even going to try to stumble across it. The browsers keep trying to kind of fix the ability for fixed positioning to work. I haven't yet really been that impressed with it. Absolute positioning always works because I know exactly where it's positioned. Now the same holds true for my footer down here. And my footer only displays for what I consider a small screen experience. And I have this little library called toolbar.js that I wrote, and it mimics the app bar experience on a Windows phone. Now all the platforms kind of encourage the buttons at the bottom. The reason why you want the buttons at the bottom is because we generally hold the phone, sort of like this. Right, so we hold it like this, and so it's a lot easier for our thumb to hit the icons and stuff down here at the bottom rather than stretching up here at the top and using another hand. Now, putting navigation and stuff at the top is not the worst thing in the world, but if you've got primary things, actions that you want to have happen, if you put them at the bottom, it makes it a lot easier. So anyway, so these are also absolutely positioned, and you can see position absolute, right is 0. Now, the developer tools put the PX there for me. I don't know why they all do it, but they do. It is 0 in my actual code. So this one's got the bottom set, not the top, but I have the height set to 35 pixels, so it is a certain height, and it adheres to that. So I'm using absolute positioning for this, and I think if we go just a little bit wider, it should go over to the side. So here I'm using a media query, telling it orientation landscape, which basically means it's now wider than it is taller. And when that's the case, make it display along the side vertically. Okay. Yeah.
If you change the absolute to the relative, what's the...
Okay, if I change it to relative, it's going to break it. Let's go see what it does. I don't know what this one's going to do off the top of my head. It should break it. Yeah, so put it over on the side, on the other side, from where I want
you decrease the one. Decrease the one.
Oh, decrease it?
It'll work.
No, it's at the top, it's not the bottom where it's supposed to be. Because it's relative, it's based on where it is in the order of the markup. So it's a little whack that way. So anyway, this gives me the ability to have the content fixed. And same for my main content here. That's also position absolute. And then the navigation that comes out from the left, that one's also absolute positioning. So I generally use the absolute positioning for my core layout elements. So if you're thinking like in the terms of ASP.NET, it'd be like your master page layout. Or like if you did include some PHP as your layout, the same concept there. Now inside of this, I don't necessarily use absolute positioning. I do here, but it's not the rule that I really go after necessarily. As you go down to it, I'll probably get more into relative and floating and inlines and stuff like that. It depends on what the content calls for. But I do use scrolling. Now this is where I'm just using kind of a simple scroll effect. If we go to some of the other things, like I did. the application from my book. The reason why I had to write this furniture site really quickly is because this is built on the Rotten Tomatoes API, and when I was here in March doing a presentation, the day before I did the presentation, they took all the movie posters out of the API, and when you've got a movie application that needs movie posters to get rendered, it really looks terrible without the movie posters. But this one uses another library I wrote called Panorama.js, and of course it's not going to move for me tonight. Oh, I know why. Because it's relying on an older version of my deep tissue library to do the swiping, and they deprecated the vendor prefix in Edge. So, but if I go to, let's just go should work over here. Yeah, there we go. So this one, it sticks on the different groups. So I made the furniture thing just kind of slide through. Just a different effect. I didn't feel like dealing with the panorama because I only had 2 days. So, anyway. Okay, but this is kind of a quick run through of how you can use absolute positioning if I get back to it. And it makes it very nice and fluid for you. And that's how you can make it stick. Now, there's other things that you kind of can see that are going on here. I know we're getting close. How much time do we got by this, Sanjay?
I mean, you can speak till 9.
9. Let's see, which one is it? Oh, okay, 15 minutes or so. I got you. All right, let me just kind of point out some other things. So I talked about responsive images, and let's get this stuff out of the way. So this is one of the main objections about responsive web design, and I was really in this camp for the first couple of years. I was very big on adaptive MDOT kind of sites, and primarily because I'm a performance first person. If it doesn't load and render in a second, I'm not done with my development. I've got to make it load really quickly. And images are a big problem. The average payload for your typical web page, typical home page, I'm just going to say because that's what HTTP Archive monitors, is over 2 megs. That's very sad. For mobile pages, it's over 1.2 megs. That's still a bad story. To really feel that pain, go to the site whatdoesmysitecost.com, put your URL in there, and it'll tell you what it costs to download that particular URL in different countries based on the lowest published data plan in that country.
What's the name of the site?
Whatdoesmysitecost.com.
What does my site cost.com?
Yeah. So images are a big deal because if we're on a mobile phone, we're downloading a big hero image that's 1,200 pixels by 500 pixels in dimensions. Well, heck, that could be 600-700 kilobytes to download. Let's put this in perspective. When I build a spa, I can build 75 to 100 page web spas for a page like a traditional web page, right? A site with 100 pages in it, with less than 200 kilobytes. That's JavaScript, CSS. The variant is the images. What kind of images does the application use, right? And it should vary, right? So if I'm on a mobile phone, you need to kind of work with your marketing department on whether or not you need that hero image on the phone. I ripped Jack in the Box a new one a few years back for their hero image being 500 kilobytes and having 5 of them download. So think about that's an information architecture thing. But if you do need an image, don't download a 600 pixel wide image on a screen that's only 320 pixels wide and then have the browser resize it. Have a set of images that match more or less the size of what's going to be rendered. And there was a lot of bickering back and forth on how to solve this problem for the first few years, and we finally had the solutions that are being implemented. And the first one is source set. So here with the source set, we use the traditional image tag, and we go ahead and we set the regular source attribute to a default image, which is what we've done all these years, right? But now we've got the ability to add this source set attribute, and we can put an array of images in here and let the browser decide which one's going to be the best to render based on what the current state of the browser size is. And the way this works is I've got this image defined right here, and I put this one's 116W. It means it's 116 pixels wide. I'm telling the browser how wide that image is. And then the browser says, okay, let me kind of figure out which one of these images works best with what we've got going on. Now, I don't have the examples up here, but you can also add another value in here and basically say like 33VW. So you can say render this image a third of the available viewport width is, again, the browser's going to decide which image is the best one to pluck from this and download. So you're not going to download all these images. You're going to only going to download what the browser determines is the best one. And they've got some good heuristics going on, and they do a pretty good job of determining which image they should download. So this is a great trick, and it's progressively enhanceable, right? So if you've got, say, IE10 you're dealing with, it's just going to look at this source tag, and it's just going to download that image. It's not even going to recognize the source set attribute. It's not going to do anything with it, so it's not going to cause a problem there.
So you're setting this up on the host server?
It's just part of your markup.
It's just part of markup?
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have to have an array on the server for it to draw from.
Just how you're going to render it. So take, for example, the feed that I was getting from Rotten Tomatoes. They provided me with an array of movie posters of 4 different sizes. So that would work out great for this, because I could just write in my template, and it would just automatically render those values for me. And I knew how wide each one of those sizes were, so I could make that a very easy thing.
So how are you setting that up in your file management?
That's the trick. That's the trick right now.
Oh, okay.
You're talking about how do I manage all the images, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's the trick I'm trying to solve in a good way. And since this is relatively new, this is kind of a new problem to solve. I'm trying to figure out a good way to maybe automate it or create a service to help with it. I'm looking at some options. I don't have the answer for this stuff right now. But the reality is, I would say you need some sort of automated process that can create 4 or 5 different dimensions and maybe even different image formats too. So another trick is the picture element, which I don't remember if I have the slides in here or not. But the picture element is the next part of the story, and it's a little bit behind where the source set is. Let's see. We're not gonna have time for all this. I don't have the picture element in here. Anyway, so the picture element is like the next story. You're starting to see that kind of creep into browser support, generally behind the about flags. I have talked to the Edge team about this. They have on the status.modern.ie site in consideration. The reality is they are trying to work on it right now. And I may get in trouble for saying that, but I expect it to drop somewhere in the next 6 months in Edge, the picture element support. I believe the source set is already supported. So the thing is, like I said, it's progressively enhanceable. So like older browsers that don't recognize it will just download the big fat default image or whatever it might be. So, and honestly, it's one of those things. Probably just as good to let that happen and worry about the newer stuff and make it progressively enhanceable, rather than doing what I've done in the past with a lot of JavaScript. So like, honestly, probably 60% of the application-specific JavaScript, that movie application, was writing code to manage the images to render the right image at the right time, based on the viewport change. So with the native support, that's like no JavaScript I have to write for that. I have a little bit more markup, but it's not like a huge hit. So I'm going to show you a couple more demos before we run out of time, because I really want to kind of show you some stuff.
I have a question about media queries.
Okay.
You can set the max width, min width, stuff like that. Obviously, CSS engine knows what the width is.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to get the value from it to know exactly what
Yes, yes, you can. In JavaScript, you can create a media query listener, and what you're doing is saying you pass it in the value of the breakpoint, the same syntax you would in CSS, and you add an event listener to it. Instead of add event listener, it's add listener. I don't know why they made a different name, but then you just pass in a callback function. That callback function gets called every time that breakpoint goes from true to false or false to true, and it tells you what the current state is, whether it's true or false. And then from there, you can branch off your logic to do what you do. If you look at the code, if you look at my repo on my GitHub for movies, I do the media queries in there, and there's probably a whole chapter on media queries, or a big section of the chapter on it. All right, why is this not loading? Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, so I'll show you a couple things with this one demo right here. This is a purely CSS heart. Okay, so this is one div element with some content applied to it. There is a library out there called CSS Shapes. You just look up CSS Shapes. It should be the first result in the search engines. And so we're using the pseudo, the after and the before, and it's doing a transform, which I mentioned kind of briefly, was the rotate. Okay, and what it's doing is it's setting the border radius and stuff like that, and it's rotating them like 45 degrees, so you got the before and after kind of crossing over each other. And when it's all said and done, you get this heart shape. And the logo on my blog, the heart logo on there is a CSS shape, and this is the exact code that I use to do that. Now let's take it the next step further. Let's animate it. Again, this is all CSS. The only thing I'm doing is adding and taking off a class to trigger the CSS animation, and it's doing this with the keyframe animations. And go back over here to the code. There's a library out there that's great. It's called animate.css. That's the URL to his little examples. He's got a bunch of turnkey keyframe animations ready to go. Hopefully load. Come on. All right, we'll come back to that. But keyframe animations are pretty cool. I wrote a blog post this week, or late last week, I can't remember. I think it's earlier this week. Anyway, last week I caught a video from the Polymer team showing how to do animations using Polymer, and I was just appalled. Why the heck did they write a big JavaScript library to do animations? It's completely unnecessary. And as he goes through this, I'm sitting there going, all he's doing is having you write JavaScript to create the CSS at runtime, compared to creating it one time and having it just there. So I go through and show how to do exactly what he did without any JavaScript. And there's really no need for the JavaScript. So to do the keyframe animations, one thing you got to do is you got to apply this animated class to your element. This is just using this library. It gives you the core concepts of it. And all we're doing here is telling how long the animation should run. And then this fill mode is about what the state should be at the end of the animation. I won't go into the details of that. I talked about it a little bit in the blog post. If you can define this differently for a particular element, you can define this as you want, but this is kind of like to make the turnkey stuff work, and you can follow the examples. You can see here, you got a hinge. It's the 2-second long animation. All right, so this is for the Flash. This is a pretty simple one. And the way a keyframe works, and the keyframe is not unique to, the concept of a keyframe is not unique to CSS. If you've done any XAML or probably ActionScript, which is Flash in the past, they have the concept of keyframe animations. If you've done like any video stuff, they've got the concept of keyframe animations. What you're doing is defining at certain points in the timeline, so in this case 0 seconds and 100% is 1 second. We want the opacity to be 1 at this last one here. So we've got these defined. There's no change here for this opacity, but the last one we want to be 1. And then we got 25 and 75%, make the opacity 0. So this makes it flash, so it goes back and forth. That's what this one's doing, okay? Let me go find another one here. So, bounce. So you see the same kind of things going with bounce. This is the WebKit prefix one, so you can just kind of take those out. But at these different points, it's going to be translate y at 0, but at these other, the 40 and the 60, we want to make it -30 and -15, so that makes it go up and down, right? And so it makes it look like it's bouncing. But we don't have to write any JavaScript to do it. The only JavaScript you do is what I showed you with the hamburger thing. When I hit the hamburger button, it toggles a class and on or off the element, and that triggers this animation. That's the only JavaScript that I ever write for animations. I want to show you some other ones that I've started playing with. Who watches Cooking Channel or Food Network? Okay, I really like their bumpers. They're really clean. And if you've noticed a lot of TV shows now, it's fine.
So it's out,
The
right?
overhead, yeah.
Top is supposed to be.
The bulb is hot.
It's okay, man. While he's doing that, are there any questions right now? Yeah.
Do you have any tutorials on the responsive images? I mean, I've been trying, there's very few online.
Yeah, I have not written anything necessarily about it. I'll tell you where to go. Cloud4.com or cloud4.net, I think. Look up Jason Grigsby. He's got a 10-part article series that he's been writing over the summer, and he dropped part 9 yesterday, or this morning, I can't remember which. And that's where I got my education on responsive images.
Cloud 9?
It's Cloud4. F-O-U-R. I can't remember if it's .com or .net.
Looks like it's .net.
.net. I think it's .net.
Portland?
Yeah, it's out of Portland.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry, .com.
It's anyway. Jason Grigsby, look it up. He also had a good interview on the Web Ahead with Jen recently, and they talked for about 2 hours. I think it was on the Web Ahead, which is the podcast. Jen Shipper does the podcast. So we're not going back up, huh?
No, it cycles for like 3 minutes or something.
Okay. He was first there, I think that's right.
Okay, it's there.
For a responsive page, one issue that I've been kind of facing is like I'll lazy load a lot of the images.
Yeah.
And there's a trick out there supposedly where it's like called a padding bottom trick, where it kind of calculates the height of the image before it preloads, so you can kind of populate that space so it's not all jumping around whenever that image lazy loads and loads.
Okay.
Have you come across like a solid solution for that? Because the padding bottom trick, it seems like it doesn't really keep the correct aspect ratio whenever it's keeping.
I don't know. I need to do that for this furniture site because they're all over the place.
Okay.
So I don't know. I'll have to investigate it a little more. It's one of those things I need to do right now with the furniture site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know who this John Molnar is from Google?
I don't know a John Molnar at Google. I got a friend that works for Microsoft named Molnar.
No, this is from Google. There's an article out there that says that the title is "Our Desktop Website Still Necessary?"
This was published recently.
Yes. And he basically said, no, you can just do it mobile only.
I'm not sure about that. I think he's probably right. You know, right now, most traffic comes from mobile class devices. Right now, the typical number I hear now is 60% is coming from mobile class devices, and that number is growing rapidly. E-commerce stuff, it's kind of interesting the trends on that. Most e-commerce, people that buy stuff online, 90% of them, at least part of the shopping experience is on a mobile device. Right now, about 80 to 90% of your transactions are still on desktop though. It's because the mobile experience typically is not very good for the transactional part. And that's part of the problem. I think once we get e-commerce sites that are good with the mobile experience, that number's going to just flip really quickly. So I see a hand over here.
Can you repeat the question of the article?
Oh, I'm sorry.
The title was "Are Desktop Websites Still Necessary?"
Okay, thanks.
Google it. And it says from John Mueller from Google.
So you spelled it differently than my friend.
I played with the VW stuff on type boxes and with type boxes kind of effects and so on. What I've noticed is that when they scale down, the type will often overlap the boxes.
Probably would because your font size is not adjusting, right?
It is adjusting.
Okay.
But it's still coming from an old typographer. It's not as tight a control as I'd like.
Okay. I've just started playing with the VWs in the last month, so this is a totally new thing.
It looks like a real shorthand way to do things, but you have similarly, I think, less control if you're scaling it down through the M's or percentages.
Fonts I would rather do with the M's than percentages than I would the VWs. VWs were the box that contains the most.
Okay.
Yeah.
What talk was last night?
What now?
What talk was last night?
Oh, I did a full hour and a half or more on responsive web design last night. Oh, the Dallas ASP.NET user group meets at the Microsoft office in Los Colinas. Yeah.
What was the user group name?
The Dallas ASP.NET user group. Toy Wright runs it. They have barbecue. Hey, Rebecca. Oh, cool. All right. I got to show you this. This is something I've been working on because I watched the Cooking Network. And I see this on other networks too, but I really like the Cooking Network's graphics. They have good effects. All right, so I'm still kind of working on it a little bit, but see how it kind of slid in and then expanded down? I'm trying to get it just right because the way the Food Network, the Cooking Channel works is they have the title part slide in, gets to a certain part, and then it drops down and shows you the details. So I'm showing how to recreate that as much as I possibly can just using CSS. I literally wrote this code while I was sitting there at my stepdaughter's karate class one day. So that's all I put into this code, and it's just a keyframe animation, which is so yeah, something like this. Where is it? why it's not doing exactly what I want to do. Like I said, I spent about 20 minutes on this during class while I was watching her. But anyway, so that's how far along I am with this. When I get it fully done, I'll have like a blog post and maybe something on my YouTube channel about it. So. All right, I think we've got to get wrapped up here. The Rangers are losing 5-2. We got to give them some runs.
Well, it didn't help when you watched last.
I know.
Can you do it again? I missed it. I was looking down and.
Oh, you want to write it again?
Yes, please.
Okay, no problem. It's down here in this bottom corner.
Okay.
It's like, they always slide out in the bottom right corner, and try to recreate it. So I'm still working on it. It'll get there. So, anyway, all right. Any other questions, real quick? Do we have things to wrap up with, or is it just?
No, that should be.
He probably wants to take home pizza because he didn't want to take it home or something like that, right? Or he's like, no, don't tell him to take the pizza.
I don't know if it's left there, but yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, that's a Euro.
Yes.